Vienna, 1902. A young doctor sits in a cramped consulting room above a circus tent. Through thin walls he hears the roar of crowds, the thud of acrobats landing on sawdust, the bright calliope music that never quite stops. His patients are the performers, strong men with ruined backs, tightrope walkers who cannot sleep, clowns whose laughter has curdled into something darker. He notices something the textbooks never mentioned. Every person who walks through his door carries an invisible weight, not illness in the traditional sense, not madness, something else, a feeling of not being enough, of falling short, of standing in the shadow of what they believe they should be. And yet, in that same feeling, he sees the seed of something extraordinary. Alfred Adler was 32 years old when he began to see it. The pattern beneath the pattern. He had been trained in the old medicine, the mechanistic view that treated bodies like broken clocks. But sitting with the circus workers, listening to their stories, he understood that human beings are not machines at all. They are artists of their own lives. Every symptom, every fear, every compensating strength, they are choices, creative solutions to problems only that person can fully know. The strong man who feels small, the aerialist who fears the ground more than the fall, the child who cannot speak but draws pictures that make adults weep. Adler called it individual psychology, not because it was about isolation, but because it honored the irreducible uniqueness of each human being. No two people see the world the same way. No universal law can explain you. You are not the sum of your instincts or your past. You are the author of your story, even when you do not realize you are writing it. This was heresy in Vienna. Sigmund Freud had already built his empire. The unconscious ruled. Sexuality determined destiny. The past was a prison. But Adler looked at his patients and saw something Freud had missed. People are not driven by the past. They are pulled by the future, by the person they hope to become, by the place they long to hold in the human community, by the goal they have set, often without knowing they set it, that organizes every thought, every gesture, every dream. He broke from Freud in 1911. It was not a quiet departure. There were accusations, betrayals, letters written and burned. Adler walked away from the inner circle, from the prestige, from the movement that would define the 20th century. He walked toward something else, a psychology of courage, a psychology of equality, a psychology that believed, against all cynicism, that human beings are fundamentally social creatures who thrive in cooperation, who heal in connection, who suffer most when they are severed from the feeling that they belong. This is the story of that psychology, not as theory in a textbook, but as a way of seeing, a way of understanding why you feel what you feel, why you do what you do, why certain patterns repeat even when you swear you will break them. Adler's vision was radical in 1911. It remains radical now, because it asks you to consider a possibility most of us have been taught to dismiss, that you are not broken, that your struggles are not diseases to be cured, but creative responses to problems you have been trying to solve since you were very small, that your flaws and your gifts emerge from the same source, that the inferiority you feel is not a verdict on your worth. It is the engine of your growth, if you let it be. And it asks something more. It asks whether you are willing to stop living for yourself alone, whether you can expand your concern beyond your survival, your success, your comfort, whether you can join the human community not as a transaction, not as a strategy, but as an act of fundamental recognition that we are all in this together, that no one is fully well while others suffer, that the measure of a life is not how high you climb, but how much you contribute to the lives around you. Adler died in 1937 on a street in Aberdeen, Scotland, far from Vienna, far from the accolades he might have received if he had stayed in Freud's shadow. He was 67. He had spent the last years of his life traveling, teaching, offering his ideas to anyone who would listen. He never built an empire, but he built something that might matter more, a psychology for ordinary life, for parents and teachers, for people who feel inadequate and people who pretend they do not, for anyone who has ever wondered why they cannot seem to change, even when they desperately want to. Tonight, we walk through his world, not as scholars, but as travelers, not to memorize, but to feel, to let his ideas settle gently, the way snow settles on a city at night, transforming everything without announcing itself. You do not need to remember every concept. You do not need to take notes. Just listen. Let the words become a kind of companion as you move toward rest. And if you find yourself drifting, let yourself drift. The ideas will be there when you return. Adler designed his psychology for people who are tired, people who are searching, people who have been told they are too much or not enough. He designed it for you, so we begin, not with a lecture, but with a question. What if the thing you have been most ashamed of is also the thing that has been guiding you toward your deepest purpose? What if your weakness is a map? There is a memory Alfred Adler returned to often. He was 5 years old, sick with pneumonia, lying in bed while the doctor whispered to his parents in the hallway. He heard the word hopeless. He understood, in the way children understand before language, that they were discussing whether he would live or die. He decided in that moment to become a doctor, not out of gratitude, out of defiance. He would prove that hopeless was a word that could be wrong. Adler never forgot the feeling of being small, fragile, less than. His older brother was handsome, confident, their mother's favorite. Alfred was sickly, awkward, unremarkable. He struggled in school. He fell behind in mathematics so badly that his teacher suggested he drop out and become a shoemaker. He became a physician instead, then a psychiatrist, then the founder of a school of thought that would ripple across a century. But he never outran the feeling, and eventually he stopped trying. He turned toward it instead. He studied it. He gave it a name, the inferiority feeling, not as a diagnosis, but as a fact of human existence. Every person begins life helpless, dependent, surrounded by giants who can do everything you cannot. You are smaller, weaker, less capable in every measurable way. This is not trauma. This is childhood. And from that universal condition, something emerges, a drive to overcome, to compensate, to become more than you are. Adler called it the striving for significance. You might call it ambition, or insecurity, or the quiet voice that says, "I am not enough yet." The feeling that propels you out of bed in the morning, that keeps you awake at night, rehearsing conversations you wish you had handled differently, that makes you push harder, reach further, prove yourself over and over to an audience you cannot name. For some, this striving becomes creative. The child who cannot speak learns to draw. The athlete who loses a leg becomes a coach. The shy student becomes a writer, finding in solitude what she could not find in the noise of the cafeteria. But for others, the feeling hardens into something else, a complex, not just the feeling of inferiority, but the belief that you are inferior. The conviction that the gap between who you are and who you should be is permanent, unbridgeable, proof of something fundamentally wrong with you. This is where suffering begins. not in the feeling itself, but in how you interpret it, in the story you tell about what it means. Adler saw three patterns in his patients. The first, they deny the feeling entirely. They construct a persona of superiority, arrogance, invulnerability. They cannot admit weakness because to do so would confirm their worst fear. They become brittle, defensive, exhausting to be around. Their relationships break under the weight of their pretending. The second, they surrender to it. They accept inferiority as identity. They withdraw, retreat, stop trying. Why compete when you know you will lose? Why risk when failure feels inevitable? They become passive, resentful, small. Their lives shrink until they fit inside the narrow space of their fear. The third, they transform it. This was Adler's hope, his wager, his entire psychology, that the feeling of inferiority is not a problem to be solved, but a force to be redirected, that the same discomfort that drives you to prove yourself can drive you toward contribution, toward growth, toward a life that matters not because it is perfect, but because it is useful. Consider the teacher who was a struggling student. She remembers the confusion, the shame of not understanding when everyone else seemed to get it. And because she remembers, she can reach the child in the back row who is drowning in silence. Her wound becomes her gift. Consider the addict in recovery who becomes a counselor. He knows the landscape of despair in a way no textbook can teach. His past, which once felt like disqualification, becomes his greatest credential. Consider the person who felt invisible as a child and now creates art that makes others feel seen. The pattern repeats. The inferiority you carry is not random. It points towards something, a gap in the world that only you are positioned to fill, a problem that only you, because of your particular suffering, are equipped to address. Adler did not romanticize pain. He saw too much of it. The patients who never found transformation, the children who absorbed their parents' cruelty and became cruel themselves, the cycles that never broke. But he also saw the possibility that consciousness itself is an act of freedom. Once you understand the mechanism, the feeling, the story, the compensation, you are no longer trapped by it. You can choose a different response, not by force of will, but by expanding your understanding of what the feeling means. You are not inferior. You are unfinished, and unfinished is not a failure. It is the human condition. It is the reason you keep growing, keep learning, keep reaching for something you cannot yet name. There is a question Adler asked his patients. He would lean forward, his voice soft, and say, "What would you do if you did not have this symptom?" The question was a trap, a gentle one, because the answer always revealed the goal the symptom was serving. The migraine that allowed you to avoid a job you hated, the anxiety that kept you from risking rejection, the anger that gave you power when you felt powerless. Symptoms are solutions. They are not good solutions. They cost too much. They isolate you. They turn life into a series of strategies for avoiding what you fear. But they are solutions nonetheless. And once you see the problem you were trying to solve, you can find a better answer. This is the first movement in Adler's psychology, from unconscious striving to conscious choice, from hiding your inferiority to understanding it, from seeing yourself as broken to seeing yourself as someone in the process of becoming. The work is not to eliminate the feeling. You cannot. It is woven into the fabric of being human. The work is to stop letting it decide for you, to meet it with curiosity instead of shame, to ask, "What is this trying to tell me? Where is it trying to take me?" And then to choose deliberately what you will build with it. Because here is the truth Adler wanted you to know. The people who change the world are not the ones who never felt small. They are the ones who felt small and refused to let that be the end of the story. They are the ones who turned their wound into their work. There is a misunderstanding about the word superiority. When Adler wrote about striving for superiority, he did not mean domination. He did not mean crushing others to feel tall. He meant something closer to completion, to wholeness, to the realization of your potential. He meant growing upward toward light. Every living thing does this. The seed becomes the tree, the child becomes the adult, the apprentice becomes the master, not because of external pressure, but because of an intrinsic drive toward development, toward becoming more fully what you are meant to be. This is not ambition in the way we usually mean it. It is not about status or wealth or fame, though those things can be part of the striving. It is about mattering, about feeling competent, about contributing something that could not exist without you. Adler believed this striving was universal, but he also believed it could go wrong. If you strive alone, if your goal is to rise by pushing others down, to feel superior only when someone else feels inferior, then your growth is poisoned. It becomes competitive, hostile, zero-sum. You cannot rest because someone is always ahead of you. You cannot celebrate because another person's success feels like your failure. This is the striving of insecurity, and it leads not to growth, but to exhaustion. The other path is different. It is the striving that lifts others as you rise, the teacher who becomes wiser by making students wise, the artist whose work gives language to feelings others have carried in silence, the parent who grows by helping a child flourish. This is the striving of social interest, and it leads somewhere sustainable. Because when your growth is tied to the growth of others, you are never alone in your effort. You are part of something larger, a community, a lineage, a shared human project that was here before you and will continue after you. You matter, but not because you are better. You matter because you are necessary. Adler told a story about a man who came to him paralyzed by doubt. The man was a talented musician, but he had not performed in years. He said he was afraid of failure, afraid of judgment, afraid that if he tried and fell short, it would confirm what he secretly believed, that he was not good enough. Adler asked him a question. If you were not afraid, what would you do? The man thought for a long time. Then he said, I would teach. Adler asked why he had not taught. The man said, because I am not a master. I am still learning. I have nothing to give. And here Adler leaned forward. You are waiting for perfection before you contribute. But perfection is not the goal. Usefulness is. The man began teaching the next week, not from a place of mastery, but from a place of shared struggle. He taught beginners. He remembered what it felt like to be lost. His students loved him not despite his imperfection, but because of it. And in teaching, he became a better musician. This is the paradox of growth. You do not grow first and then contribute. You grow by contributing. The striving for superiority, in Adler's sense, is not a solo journey toward some distant summit. It is a collaborative unfolding. You become more yourself by being useful to others. You find your voice by helping others find theirs. There is a version of striving that leads to isolation. You work harder. You achieve more. But you do it at the expense of rest, of connection, of joy. You climb, but you climb alone. And when you reach the place you thought would satisfy you, you find only more striving. Because the goal was never the achievement. The goal was the feeling you hoped the achievement would give you. The feeling of being enough, of being safe, of being valued. But that feeling cannot come from the outside. No accomplishment is big enough to fill the hole of unworthiness. No title, no prize, no recognition can convince you that you matter if you do not already believe it. This is the trap Adler wanted his patients to see. You are striving for something external to prove something internal, but the proof never arrives. The evidence is never sufficient. So you keep striving, keep chasing, keep postponing the moment when you allow yourself to stop and say, I am enough as I am. There is another way. Strive not to prove, but to grow. Strive not to be better than others, but to be more useful to others. Strive not from fear of inadequacy, but from curiosity about what you might become. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. When your striving comes from insecurity, every setback is a referendum on your worth. Every failure is evidence. Every criticism cuts deep because it confirms what you already fear. But when your striving comes from interest, from genuine care about the work, the people, the problem, then failure is just information. Criticism is just feedback. Setbacks are part of the process, not proof of your deficiency. You are free to experiment, to risk, to fail and try again, because your worth is not on the line. Adler watched children to understand this. Healthy children, he noticed, do not strive to dominate. They strive to participate, to be included, to contribute to the group in whatever way they can. The child who cannot run fast learns to tell jokes. The child who cannot read yet learns to build. They are driven not by competition but by the desire to belong, and belonging, Adler realized, is the deepest human need. Not belonging earned by proving yourself. Belonging given simply because you are here, because you are human, because you are part of us. When you feel that, you stop striving to justify your existence. You strive because life itself calls you forward, because there is work to do, because you have something to offer, however small, however imperfect. This is growth in Adler's sense, not vertical but radial, not climbing over others but expanding outward, becoming more capable, more compassionate, more connected, not so you can feel superior, but so you can be more useful, so you can give more, so you can participate more fully in the work of being human. There is a moment in every life when you realize striving will not save you. You have achieved what you set out to achieve, or you have fallen short, and either way the feeling remains, the restlessness, the sense that something is missing. This is not failure. This is the beginning of wisdom, because it is the moment when you stop measuring your life by external standards and start asking a different question. Not, am I enough? But, what am I for? Adler believed every person has an answer to that question, not handed down by fate or biology, but created by you, chosen, even if the choice was unconscious. Your life is organized around a goal, a private fiction about who you need to become, and every action, every symptom, every habit is in service of that goal. The work is to make the goal conscious, to see it clearly, to ask whether it is still serving you, to revise it if necessary. Because the goal you set when you were 5 years old, to never be weak again, to never need anyone, to never be left behind, that goal might have saved you once, but it might be destroying you now. Here is the idea that made Adler dangerous. You are not determined by your past, not by your childhood, not by your trauma, not by your genes or your class or your circumstance. You are not a machine responding to stimuli. You are not a collection of wounds waiting to be healed. You are creative. You take the raw material of your life, the body you were given, the family you were born into, the events that shaped you, and you make something of it. You interpret. You decide what it means. You choose, often without realizing you are choosing what story to tell about who you are. This was heresy in the age of determinism. Freud said the past is destiny. Pavlov said behavior is conditioning. Darwin said survival is mechanical. And here was Adler, a small man with a large vision, saying, "No, human beings are not billiard balls knocked around by forces beyond their control. They are artists, meaning makers, authors of their own lives." He called it the creative self, not creativity in the narrow sense, painting, music, invention, but creativity as a fundamental human capacity, the ability to look at the same set of circumstances and see possibility instead of prison, to take what has been and transform it into what could be. Consider two children raised in the same harsh household, same parents, same poverty, same neglect. One becomes bitter, repeating the cruelty he learned. The other becomes a social worker, dedicating her life to protecting children from what she endured. What explains the difference? Not genetics, not environment. Those were identical. The difference is in what each child made of the experience, the meaning they assigned to it, the goal they set in response to it, the story they told themselves about what it meant to survive such a childhood. This is the creative self at work. You are not passive. You are not merely reacting. You are interpreting, selecting, shaping. You are deciding, moment by moment, what matters and what does not, what to remember and what to forget, what to believe about yourself and what to reject. And those decisions accumulate into a life. Adler did not deny that the past has weight. He saw the scars. He treated the patients whose childhoods had been unbearable, but he refused to let the past be an excuse, because to say you are determined by your past is to say you are powerless to change, and powerlessness is the death of hope. Adler's wager was this: if you understand that you have been creative all along, that you have been choosing, interpreting, meaning-making, even when you did not know it, then you can choose differently now. You can revise the story, not erase it, not pretend the past did not happen, but change what it means. The wound that felt like evidence of your worthlessness can become evidence of your resilience. The failure that felt like an ending can become the beginning of something else. The rejection that broke you can become the thing that set you free. The past does not change, but its meaning is not fixed. And meaning is where your power lives. Adler told a story about a woman who came to him with severe agoraphobia. She could not leave her apartment, could not go to the market, visit friends, walk in the park. She said she was sick. She said her body betrayed her. Adler asked her what she would do if she could leave. She said she did not know. He asked again, gently, "What would you do if you were not afraid?" She hesitated. Then she said, "I would have to get a job. I would have to face my sister, who thinks I am weak. I would have to admit that my marriage is unhappy." Adler said nothing. He let the silence hold the revelation. The agoraphobia was not a disease. It was a solution, a creative response to a set of problems she did not want to face. As long as she was housebound, she did not have to risk, did not have to choose, did not have to confront the life she had built. The symptom was protecting her, but it was also imprisoning her. Adler did not judge this. He saw it as brilliant, in a way, the mind's capacity to construct a reality that serves a hidden goal. But he also saw the cost. She was safe, but she was not alive. The work, then, was not to cure the symptom. The work was to help her see what the symptom was doing, to make conscious the goal it was serving, and then to ask, is this still the goal I want? She did not change overnight, but she began to see that she had more power than she believed, that her fear was not an invader but a creation, that she could, if she chose, create something else. This is the heart of Adler's optimism, not the shallow optimism that pretends suffering does not exist, but the deep optimism that believes change is always possible, that no matter how stuck you feel, no matter how long you have lived a certain way, you retain the capacity to choose differently, because you are not your past. You are what you do with your past. The creative self is not a mystical force. It is not a soul or a spirit or a hidden essence waiting to be discovered. It is a process. The process of taking the given and making it chosen, of taking what happened and deciding what it means, of taking who you have been and imagining who you might become. This is what makes you human, not your intelligence or your language or your thumbs. Your creativity, your ability to look at the same reality everyone else sees and see something more, a possibility, a path, a way forward that did not exist until you imagined it. Adler believed in potential not as a fixed thing but as an openness. You are not a seed containing a predetermined tree. You are more like a river, shaped by the terrain but also shaping it. You respond to what comes, but you also create what comes next. There is no final version of you, no moment when you are finished, complete, fully realized. You are always in process, always becoming. And what you become is not fated, it is chosen. Even when the choice feels impossible, even when the options are terrible, you are still choosing. You are choosing what to pay attention to, what to believe, what to hope for, and those choices, however small, are the raw material of your life. This is where Adler diverged most sharply from his contemporaries. Freud saw the unconscious as a dark basement full of repressed urges. Jung saw archetypes, vast impersonal forces. Behaviorists saw conditioning, mechanical and deterministic. Adler saw agency. He saw a person, awake or asleep, constructing meaning, deciding what to care about, setting goals, even goals they could not articulate, and moving toward those goals with the whole force of their being. You are not a victim of your unconscious. You are its author, and that means you can rewrite the script. Not easily, not without effort, but it is possible. It has always been possible. You just forgot, or you were never told, or you were told the opposite, that you are broken, determined, powerless to change. But Adler is here, across a century, to tell you something different. You are not broken. You are endlessly creative, and the same creativity that built your cage can build your freedom. Alfred Adler believed that mental health could be measured by a single metric, not happiness, not success, not the absence of symptoms, but social interest. The German word is Gemeinschaftsgefühl, community feeling, the sense that you are part of something larger than yourself, that your well-being is inseparable from the well-being of others, that life is not a competition but a collaboration. This was not sentimentality, this was biology. Human beings are social creatures. We survived not because we were the strongest or the fastest, but because we cooperated, we shared food, we cared for the vulnerable. We built systems that allowed the weak to survive and the group to thrive. Alone, we die. Together, we become something extraordinary. Adler saw this in his patients. The ones who suffered most were not necessarily the ones with the worst childhoods or the deepest wounds. They were the ones who had turned inward, who had organized their lives around self-protection, self-advancement, self-concern. They were lonely, not always physically alone. Some were married, had children, held jobs, but emotionally they were isolated, cut off from the feeling that they belonged, that they mattered, that they were part of us. And without that feeling, nothing else worked. No achievement satisfied, no relationship lasted, no pleasure endured, because human beings are not built to live for themselves alone. Adler did not moralize this. He did not say you should care about others because it is virtuous or righteous. He said you must care about others because it is the only way to be well, to be fully human, to live a life that feels meaningful instead of hollow. Social interest, in Adler's framework, is not altruism. It is not self-sacrifice. It is not putting others first at the expense of yourself. It is an expansion of concern, a widening of the circle of who matters, from me to us, from my survival to our thriving, from my success to the success of the whole. This does not mean you ignore your needs. It means you understand that your needs and the needs of others are not in opposition. They are interwoven. When the community flourishes, you flourish. When you contribute to others, you feel more alive, because contribution is the antidote to meaninglessness. Adler watched children closely. Healthy children, he noticed, are naturally oriented toward others. They want to help. They want to be included. They want to do their part. But if a child is discouraged, if they are criticized, shamed, made to feel inadequate, they retreat. They turn inward. They begin to see other people as threats or obstacles or judges, and social interest withers. This is the beginning of neurosis in Adler's view, not repressed sexuality, not unconscious conflict, but the loss of social interest, the narrowing of concern from we to me, from cooperation to competition, from belonging to isolation. And once that narrowing happens, every problem becomes harder, because you are facing life alone. You have no one to rely on, no one to trust, no sense that you are part of a collective effort. You are on your own, and the weight of that is unbearable. Adler believed that every form of mental suffering could be traced back to a deficit in social interest: depression, the conviction that you have nothing to offer; anxiety, the fear that you do not belong; addiction, the attempt to fill the void of disconnection with something that cannot fill it. Even narcissism, which appears to be excessive self-love, is actually a desperate attempt to matter in the absence of genuine connection. The cure, then, is not insight, not catharsis, not medication, though medication can help. The cure is reconnection to the feeling that you are part of something, that you have a role to play, that your presence makes a difference, however small. Adler told his patients to do one thing each day for someone else, not grand gestures, not charity, just small acts of usefulness. Help a neighbor, listen to a friend, teach a child something, fix something broken, contribute in some tangible way to the life around you. Not because it will make you feel good, though it might, but because it will remind you that you are not separate, that you are woven into the fabric of human life, that your existence matters not because of what you achieve, but because of what you give. There is a story Adler loved to tell. A man came to him deeply depressed. He had tried everything: therapy, medication, travel. Nothing helped. He said he wanted to die. Adler asked him if he would be willing to do one thing before he made that decision. The man agreed. Adler told him to spend 2 hours each day for 2 weeks helping someone else, anyone, in any way. The only rule was that it could not benefit him in any obvious way. The man was skeptical, but he agreed. He started small. He helped an elderly neighbor carry groceries. He tutored a struggling student. He volunteered at a food bank. After 2 weeks, he returned to Adler. He said, "I am still depressed, but I no longer want to die." Adler asked, "Why?" The man thought for a long time. Then he said, "Because people need me." This is the power of social interest. It does not erase pain. It does not solve every problem, but it gives you a reason to stay, a reason to try, a reason to keep moving through the dark, because you are not alone in it. And your life, however small it feels, is connected to other lives. Your suffering matters, your effort matters, your presence matters. Not because of what you accomplish, but because you are here. Adler was not naive. He knew that the world is harsh, that people betray and systems oppress and circumstances overwhelm. He knew that social interest does not guarantee safety or success or happiness, but he also knew that without it, nothing else is worth having. You can have wealth and be miserable, fame and be lonely, power and be empty. But if you have social interest, if you feel connected, if you care, if you contribute, then even in suffering there is meaning. Even in struggle there is purpose, because you are part of something larger than yourself. And that is enough. Every family is a small civilization with its own rules, its own hierarchy, its own unspoken distribution of power and attention. And every child born into that civilization must figure out how to survive it, how to matter, how to belong, how to secure the love and recognition that every human being needs. Adler called this the family constellation. Not just the structure, who the parents are, how many siblings, what order, but the emotional field, the invisible web of expectations, alliances, rivalries, roles. You enter this field not as a blank slate, but as a creative interpreter. You watch, you listen, you sense who gets praised and who gets scolded. You notice what behaviors lead to warmth and what behaviors lead to abandonment. And from those observations, you make decisions. Decisions about who you need to be to survive, about what is safe and what is dangerous, about where your place is in the family and by extension, in the world. These decisions are not conscious. You do not sit down at age 3 and think, "I will become the good child to earn my mother's approval." You just do it. You feel it. You organize your entire personality around it. And those early decisions echo through your life. Adler believed that by the age of 4 or 5, your basic lifestyle is set, not fixed forever, but established, the core strategy you will use to navigate the world, the lens through which you will interpret every relationship, every challenge, every opportunity. This is why early memories matter, not because they are accurate historical records, but because they are stories you tell yourself about who you are. They are the myths you carry. Adler would ask his patients to share their earliest memory, not the first thing that happened to them, but the first thing they remember, because what you remember is what you chose to remember, what you preserved because it mattered, because it explained something, because it became part of the story you tell about your life. One patient remembered standing in a garden, holding his mother's hand, feeling safe. Another remembered being left alone in a dark room, terrified, certain no one would come. Same age, same species, radically different interpretation of what it means to be alive. The first patient grew up trusting the world, expecting support, moving through life with a quiet confidence that someone would be there if he stumbled. The second patient grew up vigilant, expecting betrayal, building walls to protect against the abandonment he was certain would come again. Both were responding creatively to their circumstances. Both were doing the best they could with what they knew, but the strategies they developed, the lifestyles they adopted, led to very different outcomes. Adler did not blame parents. He saw them as human, flawed, doing their best in their own family constellations, passing down the patterns they inherited, often without realizing it. But he also believed that understanding your family constellation is a form of liberation, because once you see the role you are playing, you can choose to stop playing it. Once you understand why you became the caretaker, the rebel, the invisible one, the perfect one, you can ask whether that role still serves you, whether the strategy that saved you as a child is destroying you as an adult. Consider the eldest child who learned to be responsible, to take care of siblings, to anticipate needs and solve problems before they became crises. That child becomes an adult who cannot rest, who feels guilty when not productive, who believes her worth is tied to how much she does for others. She is exhausted, but she does not know how to stop, because the strategy is so deeply woven into her identity that to stop would feel like ceasing to exist. Or consider the youngest child who learned to charm, to be cute, to be entertaining, to win attention through performance. That child becomes an adult who cannot be serious, who deflects intimacy with jokes, who feels hollow beneath the persona but does not know how to let anyone see the truth. These are not pathologies. They are adaptations, solutions, creative responses to the problem of mattering in a family that had limited resources, limited time, limited patience, limited love to go around. But adaptations that worked at age 5 often fail at 35, because the family you were born into is not the world you live in now, and the role that made you safe then might be making you small now. Adler's therapy often began with excavating these early patterns, not to blame, not to wallow, but to see, to hold up the story you have been telling and ask, is this still true? Was it ever true? Or was it just one child's best guess about how to survive? One patient remembered being praised only when she was quiet. She learned to disappear, to take up no space, to have no needs, and she carried that into adulthood, where she found herself in relationships with people who barely noticed she existed. She was angry about this, but she also did not know how to ask for more. Adler helped her see the pattern, not as a moral failing, but as a strategy that had outlived its usefulness. She had been protecting herself from the pain of being told she was too much, but in doing so, she had ensured that she would never be enough. The work was not to fix her. The work was to help her see that she was never broken. She was brilliantly adapted to a family that could not hold her fullness. But she no longer lived in that family, and the people in her life now wanted to know her, wanted her to take up space, wanted her to ask for what she needed. She just had to learn how. Adler believed that the family constellation shapes us, but it does not determine us, because we are creative. We interpreted the constellation once, and we can interpret it again. We assigned meaning to the roles and the relationships, and we can assign new meaning. The past is not a prison. It is a story, and stories can be rewritten. Not the events, not the facts, but what the facts mean. The rejection that felt like evidence of your unworthiness can become evidence that you were in the wrong room. The sibling who was favored can stop being a referendum on your value and start being just another person doing their best. The parent who could not see you can stop being the measure of whether you matter. Adler knew this was hard work. The family is the first world, the template, the training ground for every relationship that comes after. To revise your understanding of it is to revise your understanding of everything. But he also knew it was possible. He saw patients do it, slowly, imperfectly, with setbacks and breakthroughs and long stretches of confusion. But they did it. They stopped being the child they had to be and started becoming the adult they wanted to be. And that, Adler believed, is what therapy is for. Not to heal you, but to free you. The first child lives alone with the adults. There are no siblings to share the attention, no competitors for love. The parents are new at this, anxious, hovering. Every milestone is monumental. Every mistake feels catastrophic. The first child learns that the world is serious, that adults are the standard, that approval matters, that you must be good, must be right, must be responsible. Then the second child arrives, and the first child is dethroned. Suddenly the attention shifts. The baby is the center. The first child, who was everything, becomes not enough, or too much, or in the way. This is not trauma in the clinical sense, but it is a rupture, and the first child responds creatively. Some become caregivers, trying to win back love by being useful. Some become perfectionists, proving their worth through achievement. Some become rebels, rejecting the system that rejected them. But the pattern is set. The first child will spend a lifetime navigating the feeling of being displaced, of once having been enough and then discovering you are not. The second child enters a different world entirely. There is already a child here. The parents are calmer, more experienced, less anxious. The second child does not have the throne, so they do not fear losing it. Instead, they learn to navigate by watching. They see what the first child does, and they do something else. If the first is serious, the second is playful. If the first is obedient, the second is rebellious. If the first seeks approval, the second seeks freedom. The second child is often more socially skilled because they had to learn to compete for attention, to charm, to negotiate, to find their own space in a crowded field. They are often more flexible, more creative, more willing to take risks, because they were never weighed down by the expectation of being the responsible one. The youngest child grows up surrounded by others who are bigger, faster, more capable. They are pampered or they are ignored. Either way, they learn that the world will take care of them or it will not, and their agency is limited. Some become performers, entertaining their way into relevance. Some become helpless, leaning into dependence. Some become driven, determined to prove they are not small, and the only child lives in yet another universe, surrounded by adults, no siblings to compete with, but also no siblings to learn from. They are often mature for their age, comfortable in adult company, but awkward with peers. They carry the first child's burden expectation, responsibility without the dethronement. They are used to being the center, and when they enter the world and discover they are not, it can be disorienting. Adler did not mean any of this as determinism. He was not saying that birth order decides your fate. He was saying it shapes your starting strategy, the lens through which you first see the world, the role you initially try to play, but you are not locked into it. You can revise. You can see the pattern and choose differently. The firstborn who learned to be perfect can learn to be human. The secondborn who learned to charm can learn to be sincere. The youngest who learned to depend can learn to lead. The only child who learned to be alone can learn to belong. Adler saw this flexibility in practice. He had patients from every position who had transcended the typical pattern. Firstborns who were wild and free, middle children who were cautious and rule-following, youngest who were responsible beyond measure. The pattern is a tendency, not a destiny, but it is useful to know the tendency, because it helps you see where your default responses come from, why you feel what you feel in certain situations, why you repeat patterns that do not serve you. Understanding birth order is not about excusing yourself. It is about expanding your awareness so that when the firstborn in you starts spiraling into perfectionism, you can pause and say, "Ah, this is familiar. This is the strategy I learned when I was 4. But I am not 4 anymore, and I can choose differently now." Adler told a story about two brothers. The older was brilliant, accomplished, admired. The younger struggled in school, drifted through jobs, lived in his brother's shadow. The younger brother came to Adler feeling hopeless. He said, "I will never be as good as him." Adler asked a simple question: "Why are you trying to be as good as him?" The brother did not understand. Adler said, "You have spent your whole life competing in a game he invented, a game where the rules favor him. What if you stopped competing and started creating? What if you found your own measure of success?" The brother left the session skeptical, but over time, he began to experiment. He stopped trying to match his brother's achievements and started following his own curiosities. He became a carpenter. He was good at it. He loved it. And one day, he realized he had stopped thinking about his brother entirely, not because he resented him, but because he was no longer living in reference to him. He had found his own ground. This is what Adler wanted for everyone: not to transcend your family, but to stop being defined by it; not to reject your birth order, but to stop letting it script your life. You were born into a position you did not choose, but you are not that position. You are a person, a creative, interpreting, meaning-making person. And the role you played in your family of origin is not the role you must play forever. You can step out of it. You can write a different story. You can become who you want to be, not who you had to be. Alfred Adler believed that every person is guided by a fiction, not a lie, a goal, an imagined future that organizes your present. You do not live in response to the past. You live in pursuit of something you have not yet become. He called it fictional finalism, the idea that you are pulled forward by an image of completion, of arrival, of the person you believe you need to be. This image is not real. It has not happened. It might never happen. But it is more powerful than any fact because it shapes every choice you make. The student who stays up late studying is not motivated by the textbook in front of her. She is motivated by an image of herself as successful, as competent, as someone who does not fail. The parent who sacrifices for their child is not acting out of duty. They are acting out of a vision of themselves as a good parent, as someone who gives, as someone whose love makes a difference. The artist who works in obscurity for years is not driven by present reward. They are driven by a future they can see but cannot yet touch. A moment when the work is recognized, when it matters, when they finally prove to themselves that they were right to believe. These fictions are not conscious. You do not articulate them. You might not even recognize them, but they are there, guiding you beneath the surface of your awareness. And they are extraordinarily powerful, because the fiction you hold determines what you notice, what you value, what you pursue. Adler gave an example. Two men walk through the same city. One sees opportunity. He notices the new construction, the bustling cafes, the energy. He thinks, "This is a place where I can build something." The other sees danger. He notices the crowds, the noise, the indifference. He thinks, "This is a place where I could disappear." Same city, different fictions. The first man is guided by a vision of himself as capable as someone who creates. The world, to him, is full of raw material. The second man is guided by a vision of himself as vulnerable, as someone who must protect. The world, to him, is full of threats. Neither vision is true. Both are interpretations, stories they are telling themselves about who they are and what the world will allow. But those stories become self-fulfilling. The first man takes risks, makes connections, builds, and his life begins to reflect his fiction. The second man withdraws, avoids, protects, and his life begins to reflect his fiction. Not because the world determined it, but because they created it. Adler believed that most people are not aware of their guiding fiction. They think they are reacting to reality. They think their choices are obvious, necessary, the only logical response. But they are not. They are living out a goal they set long ago when they were very young, trying to make sense of a world that was too big and too confusing. The goal might have been, I will never be weak again, or I will be loved if I am perfect, or I will matter if I am indispensable, or I will be safe if I am invisible. These fictions are formed in childhood, but they do not stay in childhood. They grow with you. They become more sophisticated, more elaborate, more invisible, but they are still there, still guiding you, still shaping your choices in ways you do not fully see. Adler's therapy often involved making the fiction explicit. He would listen to a patient's life story, and then, at some point, he would say something like, "It seems to me that you are organizing your life around the goal of never needing anyone." The patient would be startled, then thoughtful. Then, often, they would say, "Yes, that is exactly what I am doing." And in that moment, the fiction loses some of its power. Because once you see the goal, you can ask whether it still serves you, whether the fiction that saved you once is limiting you now, whether the person you were trying to become is still the person you want to be. Adler told a story about a man who came to him with chronic anxiety. The man could not make decisions. Every choice felt catastrophic. He would agonize for days over small things, what to order at a restaurant, which route to take to work. Adler asked him what he feared would happen if he made the wrong choice. The man said, "I would be exposed as incompetent." Adler asked what would happen then. The man said, "People would see that I am not who they think I am, that I am a fraud." Adler leaned back and said, "So, your life is organized around the goal of never being exposed." The man nodded. Adler said, "That is a very difficult goal to pursue. It requires perfection. It requires never making a mistake. It requires controlling not just your own actions, but other people's perceptions." The man said, "Yes, it is exhausting." Adler asked, "What would happen if you gave up that goal?" The man looked terrified. He said, "I do not know." And that, Adler said, is where we begin. The work was not to eliminate the anxiety. The work was to change the goal, to move from never being exposed to being willing to be seen, from perfection to adequacy, from control to trust. This did not happen quickly, but over time, the man began to experiment with imperfection, with making small mistakes and discovering that the world did not end, with letting people see him struggle and finding that they did not abandon him, and slowly, the anxiety loosened. Not because the anxiety was cured, but because the goal it was serving was no longer in charge. Adler believed that the highest goal a person can hold is contribution, not personal glory, not security, not even happiness, but usefulness, mattering, being part of something larger than yourself. When your guiding fiction shifts from what can I get to what can I give, everything changes. You stop measuring your life by whether you are ahead or behind. You stop fearing judgment because you are no longer performing for approval. You stop feeling empty because you are no longer trying to fill yourself. You are pouring yourself out, and paradoxically, that is when you feel most full, because contribution is the antidote to meaninglessness. When you are useful, you do not have to wonder whether you matter. You know, not in an arrogant way, in a quiet, grounded way. You are part of the work. You are part of the us, and that is enough. There is a question that haunts modern life. Do I belong here? Not in a room, though sometimes it feels that specific, but in the world, in the human community, in the story that everyone else seems to understand but you do not. This is not a new question. Alfred Adler saw it in his patients a century ago. The ones who felt like imposters, the ones who believed that everyone else had been given a manual for life and they had missed the distribution. The ones who were certain that if people really knew them, they would be rejected. This feeling of not belonging is, in Adler's view, the root of most suffering. Not because belonging is a luxury, but because it is a necessity. Human beings are tribal creatures. We evolved in groups. We survived because we cooperated. The lone human is a dead human. This is not metaphor, it is biology. And so the feeling of not belonging is not just emotional pain, it is existential terror. It is the nervous system's alarm. You are alone, you are in danger, you are not safe. And when that alarm is chronic, when it is always ringing beneath the surface, you cannot rest, you cannot trust, you cannot fully live. Adler believed that the feeling of belonging is not something you earn. It is something you remember, because you already belong. You were born into the human community. You are part of it by virtue of being human. There is no application, no test, no threshold of worthiness you must cross. You belong because you are here. But this is hard to believe when you have been made to feel otherwise. When you were excluded as a child, when you were bullied, ignored, told you were too much or not enough, when your family treated you as a problem instead of a person. When that happens, the feeling of belonging is not automatic. It has to be rebuilt, reclaimed, rediscovered, and that work begins with a simple shift in perspective. From competing to contributing, from proving yourself to offering yourself, from measuring your worth by how you compare to others to measuring your worth by how you participate. Adler saw this shift as the essence of mental health, not symptom reduction, not happiness, but the restoration of social interest, the feeling that you are part of something, that your life is interwoven with other lives, that what you do matters not just to you but to the whole. This is not self-sacrifice. It is not martyrdom. It is the recognition that your well-being and the well-being of others are not separate. They are connected. When you contribute to the community, you strengthen yourself. When you isolate, you weaken. Adler had a practice he recommended to everyone. He called it the law of cooperation. Every day, find one small way to be useful to another person, not for recognition, not for reward, just because you can. Help someone carry something, answer a question, offer encouragement, perform a small act of kindness that costs you almost nothing but might mean something to someone else. Do this not because it will make you feel good. Do it because it will remind you that you are not separate, that you are part of a web of interdependence, that your presence matters. And over time, this practice changes you. It changes what you notice. It changes how you move through the world. It changes the story you tell about who you are. You stop being someone who is struggling to belong. You become someone who is participating in belonging, and that is everything. There is a paradox here. The more you focus on belonging, the more elusive it becomes. The more you try to earn it, to prove you deserve it, the more exhausting and impossible it feels. But when you stop trying to belong and start trying to contribute, belonging happens naturally. Because contribution is connection. When you help, you are no longer alone. When you give, you are no longer separate. When you participate, you are no longer outside looking in. You are in. Adler told a story about a woman who felt deeply lonely despite being surrounded by people. She was married. She had children. She had friends. But she said she felt like a ghost, like no one really saw her, like she was performing a role but no one knew the person beneath it. Adler asked her what she was contributing to the people around her. She was offended by the question. She said, "I do everything for them. I take care of the house. I manage the schedules. I make sure everyone is okay." Adler said, "Yes, but what are you giving that is you?" She did not understand. He said, "You are giving service, you are giving labor, but are you giving yourself, your thoughts, your feelings, your truth?" She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "No, I do not think anyone wants that." And there it was, the belief that was keeping her lonely. She believed that her real self was unacceptable, that to belong she had to hide, to perform, to be what others needed instead of who she was. And so she was surrounded by people but utterly alone, because you cannot belong if you are not there. The work then was not to make her more acceptable. The work was to help her risk being seen, to stop performing and start sharing, to let the people in her life know her, even if it meant they might reject her. She started small. She told her husband something she had been afraid to say. She shared an opinion with a friend instead of just agreeing. She let her children see her cry. And something unexpected happened. People did not pull away. They leaned in, because what she thought was unacceptable was actually what they had been missing. The real her, the human her, the her that was vulnerable and uncertain and alive. And when she let them see that, she stopped feeling like a ghost. She started feeling like she belonged. Adler believed that the feeling of community is both a gift and a practice. For some people, it comes easily. They grew up in families that made them feel valued. They moved through the world with the quiet confidence that they were part of something. But for others, it has to be learned. And the learning is not intellectual, it is experiential. You learn belonging, by showing up, by risking connection, by letting yourself be seen, and by seeing others, by practicing over and over the small acts of participation that remind you you are not alone, you are part of us, and us is where you have always belonged. Perfectionism is not about excellence. It is about fear. The fear that if you are not perfect, you are nothing. That mistakes are not just errors but revelations. That to be flawed is to be unworthy of love, of respect, of belonging. This is the prison Alfred Adler saw in so many of his patients. They were not pursuing perfection because they loved it. They were pursuing it because they were terrified of the alternative. And perfection as a goal is a trap, because it is unattainable. By definition, there is always another flaw to fix, another standard to meet, another way you fall short. So you are never done, never safe, never enough. Adler believed that one of the greatest gifts a person can receive is the permission to be imperfect, not as a concession, not as lowering your standards, but as a recognition of reality. You are human. Humans are imperfect. This is not a bug. It is a feature. Imperfection is the condition of growth. If you were already perfect, there would be nothing to learn, nothing to strive for, nothing to become. You would be finished, and life is not about being finished. It is about unfolding. Adler told a story about a student who came to him paralyzed by the fear of failure. She was brilliant, top of her class, but she could not write her dissertation. She would start, then stop, revise endlessly, throw out entire chapters because they were not good enough. Years passed. Her advisor lost patience. Her funding ran out. She was on the verge of giving up entirely. Adler asked her what would happen if she submitted something imperfect. She said, "People would see that I am not as smart as they think I am." He asked, "And then?" She said, "I would be exposed. I would be rejected. My career would be over." He let the silence sit. Then he said, "So you are willing to abandon your career to avoid the possibility of being exposed?" She looked at him, startled. He said, "You are already giving up. You are just doing it slowly, quietly, in a way that feels like you are still trying. But you are not trying. You are protecting yourself, and the cost of that protection is everything you want." She sat with that for a long time. Then she went home and wrote the dissertation. Not perfectly, but well enough. She submitted it. It was accepted. She graduated, and the world did not end. This is the revelation Adler wanted everyone to have. Imperfection is not the disaster you fear. It is the doorway to living, because as long as you are trying to be perfect, you are not fully present. You are not risking. You are not creating. You are managing, controlling, protecting. And protection is not life. Life is messy, uncertain, full of mistakes and missteps and moments when you do not know what you are doing. And that is okay, more than okay. It is necessary, because you learn by doing, by failing, by discovering that failure is not fatal. You learn by taking the risk and finding out what happens, and what happens is usually not catastrophe. What happens is information. You try something. It does not work. You adjust. You try again. This is how growth works, how creativity works, how all meaningful progress works. Not through perfect execution, but through iteration, through trial and error, through the willingness to be clumsy, to be uncertain, to be less than you wish you were. Adler saw that children understand this instinctively. Watch a child learning to walk. They fall constantly. They stumble and tip and crash into things. Do they interpret this as evidence that they are failures? Do they give up, convinced they are not good enough? No. They laugh. They get up. They try again, because they have not yet learned to attach their worth to their performance. They are not trying to be perfect. They are trying to walk, and so they keep going. But somewhere along the way we forget this. We start to believe that mistakes are verdicts, that imperfection is shame, that if we are not the best, we are nothing, and we stop trying. Or we try so carefully, so cautiously, that we never risk anything real. We never put ourselves in a position where we might fail spectacularly, and so we never create anything spectacular. Adler believed that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to act in the presence of fear. And one of the most courageous acts is to be imperfect in public, to submit the flawed work, to speak the uncertain thought, to show up as you are, not as you think you should be. This is terrifying, because it means you might be judged, criticized, rejected, but it also means you might connect, create, contribute, and the risk is worth it, because the alternative is hiding, and hiding is a slow death. You might stay safe, but you will never feel alive. Adler had a phrase he used often: the courage to be imperfect, not the courage to fail, though that is part of it, but the courage to be human, to accept your limitations, to stop pretending you are more than you are, and in that acceptance, to discover that you are enough, not because you have achieved perfection, but because perfection was never the goal. The goal is to live, to participate, to contribute, and you do not need to be perfect to do any of those things. You just need to show up and keep showing up, even when it is hard, even when you fail, even when you are embarrassed or ashamed or convinced you should have done better. You keep going, because that is what courage looks like. Not fearlessness, not perfection, just persistence, just the willingness to be imperfect and to try anyway. Every person carries a map, not a physical map, but a map of meaning, a private logic that explains how the world works, who you are, what you can expect from life. Alfred Adler called this your lifestyle. Not in the modern sense, not about where you live or what you buy, but the way you approach life itself, the pattern of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that make you recognizably you. Your lifestyle is formed early. By age 4 or 5, the basic structure is in place. You have decided, based on your limited experience, what kind of place the world is and what kind of person you need to be to survive it. Is the world safe or dangerous? Are people trustworthy or threatening? Is effort rewarded or futile? Are you capable or helpless? These are not questions you answer consciously. You absorb the answers from your family, your early experiences, the moments that left an impression, and from those answers, you construct a logic, a set of if-then rules that guide your behavior. If I am good, I will be loved. If I am strong, I will not be hurt. If I do not need anyone, I will not be disappointed. If I am perfect, I will be safe. These rules make sense within the context they were formed. They are adaptive, they solve problems, but the world changes. You grow up, you leave the family, you enter new contexts where the old rules do not apply, and yet you keep following them because they are invisible to you. They are not rules you remember learning, they are just the way things are. This is what Adler called private logic, the reasoning that makes perfect sense to you but might not make sense to anyone else. The logic that says, I cannot trust people, even though you are surrounded by trustworthy people. The logic that says, I must control everything, even though control is exhausting and impossible. The logic that says, I am not enough, even though all evidence suggests otherwise. This logic is private not because it is secret, but because it is personal, idiosyncratic, rooted in your unique history, your unique interpretation of what happened to you. And it is powerful because it shapes what you see, what you feel, what you do. Two people experience the same event, a job rejection, a breakup, a criticism, and they respond entirely differently. One person thinks, I need to try harder. The other thinks, I am not cut out for this. Same event, different logic, and over time, that logic creates a life. One person keeps trying, learns, improves, succeeds. The other person withdraws, avoids, stagnates, not because one is stronger or smarter, but because their private logic is different. Adler believed that therapy is largely about exposing this private logic, making it visible, questioning it, asking whether the rules you have been following still serve you. He would sit with a patient and listen to their story, and then, at some point, he would gently offer an observation. It seems like you believe that asking for help is a sign of weakness, or It seems like you believe that if you are not in control, something terrible will happen. Or it seems like you believe that you are only valuable when you are useful to others. And the patient would pause and think, and often they would say, "Yes, that is exactly what I believe." And in that moment, the logic loses some of its grip, because once you see it, you can question it. You can ask, where did this belief come from? Is it still true? Does it help me or hurt me? And if it hurts, you can begin to revise it, not by force, not by simply deciding to believe something else, but by testing it, by experimenting with new behaviors and discovering that the catastrophe you feared does not happen, by asking for help and finding that people do not see you as weak, by letting go of control and discovering that the world does not fall apart, by resting and discovering that your worth does not evaporate when you are not productive. This is slow work, because lifestyle is deeply ingrained. It is not just a thought, it is a whole way of being, but it is possible. Adler saw it happen again and again. Patients who came in trapped by their private logic and left with a new way of seeing, not healed in the sense of fixed, but freed in the sense of expanded. They had more options, more flexibility, more room to move. Adler told a story about a man who believed he had to be the smartest person in every room. This belief drove him to succeed. He became a professor, published widely, earned accolades. But he was miserable, because the need to be the smartest made every conversation a competition, every question a threat, every colleague a rival. He could not relax, could not learn from others, could not admit when he did not know something. His private logic was, if I am not the smartest, I have no value. And that logic was destroying him. Adler asked him where that belief came from. The man thought for a long time. Then he said, "My father was brilliant, and he made me feel stupid. The only time he paid attention to me was when I did well in school. So I learned that intelligence was the only currency that mattered." Adler said, "And now you are spending your whole life trying to win your father's approval." The man's eyes filled with tears. He said, "My father has been dead for 15 years, Adler said, "and yet you are still performing for him." The work, then, was not to make the man less intelligent. It was to help him see that his worth was not conditional on his intelligence, that he could be valued for other things, for kindness, for curiosity, for his willingness to listen, that he could be wrong and still be worthy. This took time, but slowly the man began to change. He started asking questions instead of only answering them. He admitted when he did not know something. He let others shine, and paradoxically, he became a better scholar. Because he was no longer defensive, he was open, he could learn, and he stopped being lonely, because people could finally reach him. This is the gift of understanding your lifestyle. It does not erase your past, it does not solve every problem, but it gives you choice. You are no longer blindly following rules you set when you were 4. You are consciously choosing how you want to live now. And that choice, however small, is freedom. Alfred Adler did not see neurosis as a disease. He saw it as a strategy, a way of life organized around a mistaken goal, a creative solution to a problem that has become more painful than the problem it was meant to solve. This was a radical reframing. In Adler's time, neurosis was seen as weakness, pathology, a failure of character or constitution, something to be cured, corrected, or contained. But Adler looked at his patients and saw brilliance. He saw people who had constructed elaborate systems to protect themselves from the thing they feared most: rejection, failure, exposure. inadequacy, and those systems worked for a while. The agoraphobic who cannot leave the house does not have to face the judgment of the world. The hypochondriac who obsesses over illness has a reason to avoid risk. The perfectionist who cannot finish anything does not have to face the possibility that the finished work is not good enough. These are not random symptoms, they are solutions, but they are solutions that cost too much, because they keep you safe by keeping you small. They protect you from pain by preventing you from living. Adler believed that every neurosis is organized around the avoidance of a task, not a literal task, but one of the three great tasks of life: work, love, and community. You avoid meaningful work because you fear you will fail. You avoid intimate relationships because you fear you will be rejected. You avoid community because you fear you do not belong. And the symptom, the anxiety, the depression, the compulsion, the phobia, gives you a reason to avoid without admitting you are avoiding. You are not weak. You are not lazy. You are not broken. You are sick. And sickness is a legitimate excuse. Adler saw through this, not with judgment, but with compassion. He understood why people do this. He understood that the alternative, facing the task, risking failure, exposing yourself to possible rejection, feels unbearable. But he also understood that the symptom is a prison, and eventually, the safety of the prison becomes its own suffering. Adler had a technique he used often. He would ask a patient, "What would you do if you did not have this symptom?" The question was simple, but the answer was revealing, because it always pointed to the thing the person was avoiding. The woman with debilitating migraines would say, "I would have to go back to work." The man with social anxiety would say, "I would have to try to date." The person with chronic fatigue would say, "I would have to stop disappointing people." And there it was, the task, the fear. Adler did not tell people to simply face their fears. He was not a behaviorist. He did not believe in forcing change. Instead, he helped people understand what their symptoms were doing for them. And once they understood, they could begin to ask whether there was another way, a way to meet the task without the symptom, a way to risk failure without collapsing, a way to try and survive the trying, even if the outcome was not what they hoped. Adler told a story about a woman who had been depressed for years. She did not leave her bed. She said she had no energy, no motivation, nothing felt worthwhile. Her family was exhausted. They tried everything: doctors, medications, encouragement, frustration. Nothing worked. Adler asked her a different question. He said, "If you woke up tomorrow and felt completely well, what would you have to do?" She thought for a long time. Then, quietly, she said, "I would have to face my husband." Adler asked what she meant. She said, "I am angry at him. I have been angry for years, but if I tell him, he might leave, and I do not know who I would be without him." So the depression was not just sadness. It was a strategy. It kept her from having to confront the marriage, from having to risk the loss, from having to choose between staying silent and speaking up. As long as she was depressed, the decision could be postponed, but she was paying for that postponement with her life. Adler did not tell her to leave her husband. He did not tell her to stay. He simply helped her see the cost of not choosing. And slowly, she began to make different choices. She started small. She got out of bed. She spoke to her husband. Not everything, but something. And the depression began to lift. Not because it was cured, but because she stopped needing it. She had found another way to meet the task. Adler believed that neurosis is not a life sentence. It is a phase, a detour, a mistaken path that can be corrected once you see where it leads. And seeing where it leads is half the work. Because once you understand what your symptom is protecting you from, you can ask whether the protection is worth the cost, whether the safety you are clinging to is actually keeping you safe, or whether it is just keeping you stuck. Adler's vision of mental health was not the absence of symptoms. It was the presence of courage, the courage to face the tasks of life without hiding, without excuses, without the need to be perfect or invulnerable or beyond reproach. The courage to try and fail and try again. The courage to love and be rejected and love again. The courage to belong even when you are uncertain whether you are wanted. This is not easy, but it is possible, and it is the only way to live. Not in the prison of your symptoms, but in the openness of the world, where there is risk, yes, but also possibility, where there is pain, yes, but also joy, where there is failure, yes, but also growth, and where, if you are willing to try, there is a life worth living. Alfred Adler believed that education is not about filling empty vessels. It is about kindling. A child is not born broken. A child is not born incomplete. A child is born with potential, with curiosity, with a drive to learn and grow and contribute. And the job of the teacher, of the parent, of the community is not to shape the child into something else, but to help the child become more fully themselves. This is education in Adler's sense, not instruction, not correction, but encouragement. The word encouragement comes from the root core heart, to give courage, to help someone find the strength that is already inside them. This is different from praise. Praise says, you are good because you succeeded. Encouragement says, you are valuable regardless of the outcome. Praise is conditional. It depends on performance, on meeting a standard, on being better than someone else. Encouragement is unconditional. It recognizes effort. It honors the trying, even when the trying does not lead to success. Adler saw this distinction as essential because praise creates anxiety. It teaches children that their worth is contingent on their achievements, that they are loved when they win and tolerated when they lose. And so they become afraid to fail, afraid to risk, afraid to try anything they might not be good at. But encouragement creates confidence. It teaches children that they are valued for who they are, not just for what they do. That mistakes are part of learning, that failure is not a verdict on their worth. And so they become willing to try, to experiment, to grow. Adler believed that most behavioral problems in children are not defiance or laziness or moral failing. They are discouragement. The child who acts out is often a child who feels powerless, who does not believe they can matter in positive ways, who has learned that negative attention is better than no attention. The child who withdraws is often a child who has given up, who does not believe they can succeed, who has decided it is safer not to try than to try and fail. And the solution is not punishment, it is not shame, it is not more control. The solution is encouragement, helping the child see that they are capable, that they matter, that their contribution is needed. Adler told a story about a boy who was failing in school. The teachers said he was lazy. The parents said he was defiant. The boy said nothing. He just sat in the back of the classroom, silent, refusing to participate. Adler spent time with the boy. He did not lecture. He did not criticize. He just asked questions. What do you like to do? The boy shrugged. What are you good at? The boy said. Nothing. Adler said, I do not believe that. The boy looked up, surprised. Adler said, everyone is good at something. You just have not found it yet. Over the next weeks, Adler watched the boy. He noticed that the boy loved to draw, so he arranged for the boy to help illustrate a school project. The boy's drawings were remarkable. The teachers were amazed. The other children admired them. And slowly, the boy changed. Not because Adler fixed him, but because Adler helped him see that he had something to offer, that he was not worthless, he was not incapable, he was just discouraged. And once the discouragement lifted, the boy flourished. Adler believed that this principle applies to adults as well. Most people who struggle are not lacking in ability, they are lacking in encouragement. They have internalized the message that they are not enough, that their efforts do not matter, that they are destined to fall short, and so they stop trying. Or they try half-heartedly, with the expectation of failure, and their expectation becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The work, then, is not to teach them skills. The work is to restore their courage, to help them see that they are capable, that they matter, that their contribution, however small, is valuable. Adler had a simple practice he recommended to parents and teachers. Never compare. Never say, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Never say, "Everyone else can do this. Why can't you?" Because comparison is discouragement. It teaches the child that they are being measured against someone else, that their worth is relative, that there is a hierarchy and they are on the bottom. Instead, notice effort. Say, "I see how hard you are trying." Say, "I appreciate what you contributed." Say, "You made a difference today." These are not empty platitudes. They are recognitions of value, and they give the child or the adult a reason to keep going. Adler believed that encouragement is not just good pedagogy. It is a moral obligation, because every person carries a fragile sense of worth, and that sense can be shattered by criticism, by comparison, by rejection, but it can also be nurtured, strengthened, restored by someone who sees you, who believes in you, who reminds you when you have forgotten that you are capable, that you are enough, that you matter. This is the gift of encouragement, and it is the gift we owe each other, not just in classrooms, but in families, in friendships, in communities. Everywhere people are struggling to believe in themselves, we have the opportunity to offer encouragement, to say, "I see you, I believe in you, keep going." And that might be the most important work any of us ever do. Alfred Adler believed that love is not a feeling, it is a task, one of the three great tasks of life, along with work and community, and like all tasks, it requires skill, effort, and courage. It requires you to show up, to risk, to give without guarantee of return. This is not the love of fairy tales. It is not destiny or soulmates or love at first sight. It is the love of partnership, of equals, of two people choosing every day to build something together. Adler saw this as radical. In his time, marriage was not about partnership. It was about roles, hierarchy. The man led, the woman followed. Love was secondary to duty, to survival, to the maintenance of social order. But Adler believed that relationships built on inequality cannot be healthy, because inequality breeds resentment. When one person has power and the other does not, the one with power becomes arrogant, the one without becomes bitter, and the relationship becomes a struggle, a negotiation, a site of conflict instead of connection. Adler's vision was different. He believed that love, at its best, is a meeting of equals. Two people who see each other fully, who respect each other's autonomy, who support each other's growth, not because they need each other, but because they choose each other. This distinction matters. A relationship built on need is fragile. If your partner stops meeting your needs, the relationship collapses. If you stop feeling needed, you feel worthless. But a relationship built on choice is resilient because choice can be renewed. Every day you can choose again, not out of obligation, but out of recognition. I choose you, not because I cannot survive without you, but because I want to build a life with you. Adler saw that many relationships fail because people enter them with the wrong goal. They are looking for someone to complete them, to fix them, to make them feel whole. But no one can do that. No partner can fill the void of self-worth. No relationship can compensate for the work you have not done on yourself. And when you expect your partner to do that, you are setting up both of you to fail. Adler's advice was simple. Become a whole person first, then find another whole person and build something together. Not to complete each other, but to complement each other. Not to fill gaps, but to expand possibilities. This is partnership in Adler's sense. Two people, each with their own goals, their own interests, their own lives, choosing to weave those lives together. Not in dependence, but in interdependence. Not in fusion, but in cooperation. Adler believed that the success of a relationship could be measured by one question. Does this partnership make both people more fully themselves? Or does it require one or both to shrink? If a relationship demands that you hide parts of yourself, pretend to be less than you are, suppress your needs or desires or dreams, then it is not a healthy relationship. It is a cage, and no amount of love can make a cage feel like freedom. Adler told a story about a couple who came to him on the verge of divorce. They had been married for 20 years. They had children. They had built a life, but they were miserable. The wife said, "He never listens to me. He does not care what I think." The husband said, "She is never satisfied. Nothing I do is good enough." Adler listened, and then he asked each of them the same question: "What would you do if your partner were not here?" The wife thought for a long time. Then she said, "I would go back to school. I always wanted to finish my degree." The husband said, "I would travel. I have always wanted to see the world." Adler asked, "Why have you not done these things?" They both said, "Because of the marriage." And there it was, the problem. They had each given up parts of themselves to maintain the relationship, and now they resented each other for the sacrifice. But the sacrifice was not necessary. It was a choice they had made, based on the belief that partnership requires self-erasure. Adler helped them see that this belief was false, that they could support each other's growth instead of standing in the way of it, that the wife could go back to school and the husband could travel and the marriage could be stronger for it. Because when both people are growing, the relationship grows. When both people are fulfilled, there is less resentment, less bitterness, less of the quiet erosion that kills connection. This is Adler's vision of love, not as sacrifice, but as mutual support, not as surrender, but as collaboration, not as losing yourself, but as becoming more fully yourself with someone by your side. Adler believed that equality in relationships is not just a moral ideal, it is a practical necessity, because relationships built on inequality cannot last. The one with less power eventually rebels. The one with more power eventually tires of carrying the burden. But in a relationship of equals, both people carry the load. Both people contribute. Both people are responsible for the health of the partnership. And that shared responsibility is what makes it sustainable. Adler saw this in his own marriage. He did not write much about it, but those who knew him said he treated his wife as an equal. He valued her opinions, he supported her work, he shared in the care of their children. This was unusual for the time, but for Adler it was essential, because he could not teach equality in his office and practice inequality in his home. And he believed that the same principles that create a healthy society create a healthy relationship. Respect, cooperation, mutual support. These are not just ideals, they are practices, and they require effort. They require you to listen, to compromise, to see your partner not as an extension of yourself, but as a separate person with separate needs, and to honor those needs, even when they conflict with your own. This is hard work, but Adler believed it is the only work worth doing. Because love, in the end, is not about finding someone who makes you happy. It is about becoming someone who can make a partnership thrive, and that is a task you choose every day for as long as you live. You are not an island. You are a node in a network, a thread in a fabric, a note in a symphony. Alfred Adler believed that the self does not exist in isolation. It is always embedded in social contexts, always shaped by relationships, always defined, in part, by the community it inhabits. This was not a dismissal of individuality. Adler honored the uniqueness of each person, the creative self, the private logic, the irreducible mystery of who you are. But he also understood that who you are cannot be separated from who you are with. You become yourself in relation to others. In the eyes of your parents, you learn whether you are lovable. In the feedback of your peers, you learn whether you are competent. In the norms of your culture, you learn what is valuable and what is shameful. The self is not a fixed essence waiting to be discovered. It is a process, a negotiation, a conversation between your inner world and the outer world. And the outer world matters. Adler saw this in his patients. The ones who suffered most were not necessarily the ones with the worst internal conflicts. They were the ones who felt disconnected, alienated, cut off from the social world. They had no one to reflect them, no one to affirm them, no one to remind them that they belonged, and without that, they became ghosts, invisible to others, invisible, eventually, to themselves. Adler believed that the health of the self depends on the health of the community. If the community is toxic, competitive, judgmental, exclusionary, then the self becomes fragmented, defensive, exhausted. But if the community is supportive, cooperative, affirming, inclusive, then the self can flourish. You are not separate from your environment. You are shaped by it, and you shape it in return. This is why Adler was so interested in social systems, in schools, in workplaces, in neighborhoods, in governments, because he understood that individual therapy, while helpful, is not enough. If you send a person back into a toxic system, they will be re-wounded. But if you change the system, if you make it more equitable, more cooperative, more humane, then everyone within it has a better chance of thriving. Adler was not naive about this. He knew that systems are hard to change, that power resists redistribution, that inequality is entrenched. But he also believed that change is possible, that every person who chooses cooperation over competition, who chooses kindness over cruelty, who chooses inclusion over exclusion, is shifting the system, slowly, imperceptibly, but shifting it nonetheless. Adler told a story about a factory where he was asked to consult. The workers were unhappy, productivity was low, turnover was high. The owners blamed the workers blamed the owners. Adler spent time observing, and he noticed something. The factory was organized as a hierarchy. The managers gave orders. The workers obeyed. There was no input, no collaboration, no sense of shared purpose. The workers felt like cogs in a machine, and so they did the minimum. They resented the work. They left as soon as they could. Adler suggested a change. He proposed that the workers be included in decision-making, that their input be valued, that they be treated not as tools but as partners. The owners were skeptical, but they agreed to try, and over time, the culture of the factory changed. Workers began to care about the quality of the work. They offered ideas for improvement. They stayed longer. They took pride in what they built, not because they were paid more, though eventually they were, but because they felt like they mattered, because they were no longer cogs. They were participants, and participation is a human need. Adler believed that the same principle applies to families, schools, nations. When people are treated as objects, when their worth is measured by their utility, when their needs are ignored, when their voices are silenced, they become alienated. They withdraw, they rebel, they suffer. But when people are treated as subjects, when their worth is inherent, when their needs are considered, when their voices are heard, they flourish. They contribute, they cooperate, they thrive. This is not idealism, this is pragmatism, because societies built on inequality are unstable. They require coercion to maintain. They produce resentment, conflict, breakdown. But societies built on equality are resilient. They produce cooperation, creativity, well-being, and the same is true for families, for schools, for relationships. Equality is not just a moral good, it is a practical necessity. Adler was ahead of his time in seeing this. He wrote about democracy in psychology before democracy was a universal value. He wrote about gender equality before feminism had a name. He wrote about the social determinants of health before public health existed as a field. He saw the connections between personal suffering and social injustice, and he believed that you could not fully address one without addressing the other. This is why his psychology is inherently political, not in a partisan sense, but in the sense that it recognizes power. Who has it? Who does not? How it shapes lives, and it asks you to consider your role in those dynamics. Are you using your power to dominate or to uplift? Are you participating in systems that harm or in systems that heal? Are you building a world where everyone can flourish or a world where only some can? These are not easy questions, but Adler believed they are necessary questions because the self is social. Your well-being is inseparable from the well-being of others. And if you want to be fully well, you must work toward a world where everyone can be well. This is not self-sacrifice. It is enlightened self-interest. Because when the community thrives, you thrive. When others are free, you are free. And when you contribute to the flourishing of the whole, you feel most fully alive. Alfred Adler did not see therapy as archaeology. He was not interested in digging through your past, exhuming buried traumas, analyzing every wound. He saw therapy as reorientation, a turning, a shift in perspective, a movement from one way of seeing to another. The goal was not insight for its own sake. The goal was change, and change does not come from understanding alone. It comes from doing, from trying new behaviors, from testing old beliefs, from discovering, through lived experience, that the story you have been telling about yourself is not the only story. Adler's therapy was short, pragmatic, focused. He did not believe in years of analysis. He believed in weeks or months of collaborative work. Enough time to understand the pattern, to see the mistaken goal, to imagine a different path. And then he expected his patients to walk that path, not alone. He offered support, guidance, encouragement, but he did not do the work for them, because the work of change is ultimately yours. No therapist can live your life. No one can choose for you. No one can give you courage. They can only help you find the courage that is already inside you. Adler's sessions were conversations. He sat with his patients not as an authority, but as a partner. He asked questions. He listened. He offered observations. But he did not diagnose. He did not label. He did not tell people what was wrong with them. Instead, he helped them see what they were trying to do, what goal they were pursuing, what strategy they were using, what cost they were paying. And then he asked, "Is there another way?" This is reorientation, not fixing what is broken, but expanding what is possible. Not curing a disease, but helping a person see that they have more options than they realized, that the cage they feel trapped in is a cage they built, and because they built it, they can unbuild it. Adler believed that the therapeutic relationship itself was a form of reorientation, because in the presence of someone who sees you without judgment, who values you without condition, who believes in your capacity to change, you begin to see yourself differently. You stop being the failure you thought you were. You stop being the victim you thought you were. You stop being the broken thing waiting to be fixed. And you start being a person, a creative, capable, imperfect person who is doing their best and who can do better. This shift is subtle, but it is everything. Adler told a story about a man who came to him convinced he was doomed. The man said, "I am just like my father, angry, selfish, incapable of love. It is in my blood." Adler asked, "Do you want to be like your father?" The man said, "No, but I do not have a choice." Adler said, "You are here. That is a choice. You are seeking help. That is a choice. You are questioning the pattern. That is a choice. You are not your father. You are you, and you can choose differently." The man looked skeptical, but over time, he began to experiment with that idea. He noticed moments when he acted like his father, and instead of surrendering to the inevitability of it, he paused. He chose a different response. Not always, not perfectly, but sometimes. And over time, those small choices accumulated. He was not doomed. He was learning, and that made all the difference. Adler believed that one of the most important things a therapist can do is instill hope, not false hope, not denial, but realistic, grounded hope. The hope that change is possible, that you are not fixed, that your past does not determine your future. This is not always easy to believe, especially if you have tried to change before and failed. If you have been told you are broken, if you have internalized the belief that you are beyond help. But Adler insisted that no one is beyond help. As long as you are alive, you are capable of change. It might be hard. It might take time. It might require more courage than you think you have. But it is possible, and the work of therapy is to help you see that. Adler also believed that therapy should be educational, not in the sense of lectures, but in the sense of learning. You learn how your lifestyle was formed. You learn how your private logic works. You learn to recognize when you are operating from old patterns instead of present reality. And you learn new skills, how to cooperate, how to contribute, how to ask for help, how to tolerate imperfection, how to belong. These are not innate, they are learned. And if you did not learn them as a child, you can learn them now. This is one of the most hopeful aspects of Adler's psychology. He did not believe that your childhood determined everything. He believed that you can relearn, you can revise, you can develop the capacities you did not develop before. It is never too late. Adler's therapy ended not with a cure, but with a commitment to continue the work, to keep practicing, to keep choosing, because therapy is not an endpoint, it is a beginning, the beginning of a life lived differently, a life oriented not around self-protection, but around contribution, not around proving, but around participating, not around perfection, but around growth, and that is a life worth living. Alfred Adler believed that democracy was not just a political system, it was a psychological necessity, a way of organizing human relationships that honors the fundamental equality of all people. This was more than philosophy. It was the core of his entire psychology. Because if you believe that every person has worth, that every person has something to contribute, that every person deserves respect, then you cannot justify hierarchies that place some people above others. You cannot justify systems that grant power to a few and deny it to the many. You cannot justify treating people as means to an end instead of ends in themselves. Adler lived through the collapse of empires. He saw the rise of totalitarianism. He watched as old hierarchies crumbled and new ones emerged. And he believed that the future of humanity depended on whether we could learn to live as equals, not as competitors, not as dominators and dominated, but as partners. This was not a naive dream. Adler understood power. He understood that people resist equality when equality threatens their privilege. But he also believed that equality is the only sustainable foundation for a healthy society, because inequality breeds resentment, and resentment breeds conflict, and conflict, left unresolved, destroys communities. But equality breeds cooperation, and cooperation breeds stability, and stability creates the conditions for everyone to thrive. Adler saw this playing out in families. Authoritarian parents who demanded obedience produced children who were either submissive or rebellious. But neither outcome was healthy. The submissive child learned to be passive, to have no voice, to see themselves as powerless. The rebellious child learned to see authority as the enemy, to resist cooperation, to be perpetually at war. But democratic parents, parents who respected their children, who listened to them, who included them in decisions, produced children who were confident, cooperative, capable, because they learned that their voice mattered, that they were part of something, that they had both rights and responsibilities. This is democracy in miniature, and Adler believed it was the model for all human relationships. In schools, democratic teachers did not rule through fear or control. They created classrooms where students had input, where mistakes were learning opportunities, where everyone's contribution was valued. And in those classrooms, students flourished, not just academically, but socially. They learned to cooperate, to solve problems together, to see themselves as part of a community. In workplaces, democratic organizations did not operate through command and control. They included workers in decisions, respected their expertise, treated them as partners rather than resources. And those organizations were more productive, more innovative, more resilient, not because democracy is soft or permissive, but because it unleashes human potential. When people feel valued, they contribute. When they feel powerless, they withdraw. This is not ideology. This is human nature. Adler saw the connection between psychological health and political structure. He believed that authoritarian societies produce neurotic individuals. Because authoritarianism requires submission, it requires you to suppress your voice, your needs, your autonomy, and that suppression creates inner conflict. resentment, a sense of powerlessness that manifests as anxiety, depression, or psychosomatic illness. But democratic societies, societies that honor equality, that protect freedom, that include everyone in the decisions that affect their lives, create the conditions for psychological health. Because democracy affirms your worth, it gives you agency, it allows you to participate, and participation is a human need. Adler was writing in the 1920 seconds and 1930 seconds as fascism was rising across Europe. He saw what was coming. He saw the appeal of strong leaders, simple answers, scapegoating, us versus them thinking. And he understood that these were symptoms of discouragement on a mass scale. People who feel powerless are vulnerable to authoritarian promises, promises of strength, order, belonging. But those promises are lies, because authoritarian systems do not create strength. They create brittleness. They do not create order. They create suppression. They do not create belonging. They create conformity. And conformity is not the same as community. Adler believed that the antidote to authoritarianism was not just political resistance, it was psychological education, teaching people to think for themselves, to trust their own judgment, to see through manipulation, teaching people that they are not powerless, that they have agency, that they can choose, and teaching people that equality is not a threat but a foundation, that your well-being does not require others to be beneath you, that security does not come from dominance but from cooperation. This is why Adler's psychology is inherently democratic. It does not place the therapist above the patient. It does not assume that the expert knows best. It does not treat people as problems to be solved. It treats people as collaborators, as creative beings, as equals, and it trusts that given the right conditions, encouragement, support, a sense of belonging, people will find their own way. Adler left Vienna in 1932 as the political situation darkened. He moved to the United States, where he spent his final years teaching, writing, traveling. He believed America, with its democratic ideals, could be a laboratory for his psychology, a place where equality was more than an idea, where it could be lived, practiced, embedded in institutions. He died before he could see whether he was right, but his vision remains, a vision of a world where every person is valued, where power is shared, where cooperation is the norm, where no one is above and no one is beneath, where we are all simply us. And where that is enough, Alfred Adler died on a street in Aberdeen, Scotland in 1937. He was walking to give a lecture. He had been traveling constantly, teaching anyone who would listen. His heart gave out. He collapsed on the pavement. There was no grand funeral, no state honors, no monument. His ideas, in the years immediately after his death, were eclipsed by Freud's, overshadowed by behaviorism, dismissed as too simple, too optimistic, too soft. But they did not disappear. They went underground. They were absorbed into other schools of thought, reframed, repackaged, often without credit. You can see Adler in cognitive therapy's focus on mistaken beliefs, in humanistic psychology's emphasis on growth and potential, in family systems theory's attention to roles and dynamics, in positive psychology's focus on strengths rather than pathology, in modern parenting approaches that emphasize encouragement over punishment. Adler is everywhere, but rarely named. This is both a tragedy and a triumph. A tragedy because his contributions have been forgotten by many who benefit from them, but a triumph because his ideas have become so integrated into the culture that they feel obvious. The idea that you are not determined by your past, the idea that your symptoms are creative solutions, the idea that relationships should be equal, the idea that children should be encouraged, not shamed. These were radical in 1911. Now they are common sense. And that is Adler's legacy. Not a school with his name on it, but a set of ideas that changed how we think about being human. Today, Adlerian therapy is practiced around the world. It is less famous than psychoanalysis or cognitive behavioral therapy, but it endures. Adlerian therapists still ask the same questions Adler asked. What would you do if you did not have this symptom? What is your earliest memory? What role did you play in your family? What is your goal? And is it serving you? And they still offer the same thing Adler offered. Not answers, but perspective. Not cures, but reorientation. Not fixing, but freeing. Adler's ideas have also influenced education. The concept of the growth mindset, the belief that abilities can be developed through effort, is deeply Adlerian. The emphasis on social-emotional learning, on helping children develop empathy and cooperation, echoes Adler's focus on social interest. The movement toward restorative justice in schools, away from punishment and toward repair, reflects Adler's belief that misbehavior is discouragement. And in parenting, Adler's influence is profound. The books that tell you to encourage effort instead of praising talent, the approaches that emphasize natural consequences instead of punishment, the advice to listen to your children, to include them in decisions, to treat them with respect. All of this is Adlerian, whether it names him or not. But perhaps the most important application of Adler's psychology is not in therapy or schools or parenting. It is in how you see yourself. Adler offers you a different story. Not the story that you are broken and need to be fixed. Not the story that your past determines your future. Not the story that you are alone, competing against everyone else for scarce resources. But a story of possibility, a story in which you are creative, in which you can choose, in which you belong. A story in which your struggles are not evidence of failure, but evidence of effort. A story in which your flaws and your gifts come from the same place, your attempts to solve the problems of being human. A story in which you do not have to be perfect to be worthy. You just have to show up, to try, to contribute. And in contributing, you find meaning. This is the gift Adler left. Not a doctrine, but a lens. A way of seeing that expands what is possible. That turns shame into compassion, fear into courage, isolation into belonging. You do not need to be a therapist to use this lens. You do not need to study Adler or memorize his concepts. You just need to ask yourself the questions. What am I striving for, and is it serving me? What role did I play in my family, and am I still playing it? What would I do if I were not afraid? How can I contribute today? These are simple questions, but they are not easy. They require honesty, vulnerability, a willingness to see yourself clearly. But they also offer freedom, because once you see the pattern, you can choose differently. Once you understand the goal, you can revise it. Once you recognize your worth, you can stop trying to earn it. And once you feel that you belong, you can stop fighting for a place and start building a world. Adler believed that psychology is not just for the consulting room, it is for life, for the decisions you make every day, the relationships you build, the work you do, the way you treat yourself and others. And his psychology, at its core, is an invitation to stop hiding, to stop pretending, to stop living in the prison of perfectionism or the cage of fear. An invitation to be human, imperfect, uncertain, struggling, but also creative, capable, connected. An invitation to belong, not by earning it, not by proving yourself, but by recognizing that you already do. You are part of us, you always have been, and there is work for you to do, contribution you can make, a role only you can fill, not because you are special, but because you are here, and that is enough. Adler's voice is quiet now, a century removed, but his questions remain. And if you listen, if you let them settle into the soft places of your mind, you might find something unexpected. Not answers, but direction. Not certainty, but courage. Not perfection, but permission. Permission to be who you are, to try and fail and try again, to need others, and to let others need you, to matter not because you are extraordinary, but because you are human, and that, Adler believed, is more than enough. It is everything. The night is quiet now. The words have settled. You have traveled through Adler's world, through his vision of what it means to be human, and perhaps you have found something there, a reflection, a possibility, a reminder that you are not broken, that you are not alone, that you are not determined by your past or defined by your wounds. You are creative, you are capable, you belong, and the life you want is not something you find, it is something you build, one choice at a time, one contribution at a time, one day at a time. Adler would tell you not to wait for permission, not to wait until you are perfect, not to wait until you are certain. Just begin, just choose, just try. And in the trying, you will discover what he always knew, that you were never as powerless as you believed, that you were never as separate as you felt, that you have always belonged. You just forgot, but now you remember, and remembering is where everything begins. Rest now. Let these ideas settle. Let them become part of you, not as rules to follow, but as companions on the journey. And when you wake, you will still be you, but perhaps you will see yourself a little differently, not as someone who needs to be fixed, but as someone who is already whole, already worthy, already home.